Hello, and welcome to the Crane Bag Podcast. I am Jay Leeming. Today we're going to continue our exploration of the great sprawling epic of the Iliad. The story so far. Well, there was a wedding. There was a wedding at the top of a mountain, and it was a wedding between a god and a human. A human man named King Peleus married a goddess, Thetis, the lady of the deep waters of the sea. And at a wedding such as this, well, all the gods and many humans came as well. The gods came down, the humans went up to the heights of this mountain. And it was a joyous wedding filled with laughter and with song. And then someone came who had not been invited. An uninvited woman dressed all in black, her cloak the color of night, the color of coal or of crow feathers. And she came not simply to witness, to observe, but to take part. And how do you take part? How do you become part of a community? Well, one way is to give a gift. So she tossed a gift, a golden apple, through the air, and it landed at the feet of three goddesses, Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. A moment before, these three goddesses had been dancing in a circle, laughing and holding hands. But then Hera picked up the apple, and she saw that on this apple were written the words, "For the most beautiful of them all." Well, it didn't take long, and soon these three goddesses were arguing over who among them should receive this gift. The woman dressed in black who had given that apple, well, she was gone. So they gave it to Zeus. They gave the decision to Zeus, the king of the gods, the father of them all. And he, on this occasion, was wise enough not to make a decision. He instead said, well, we need someone outside of our realm here. We need a human who comes from far away. His name is Paris, and he comes from the land of Troy. That's where we are, and the story is flowing. It is all around us. So then, let us begin. So Hermes led the three goddesses across the sea into the kingdom of Troy. And in that kingdom there was a mountain called Mount Ida. And on the slopes of that mountain there were many forests. And in one of those forests there was a meadow, and in that meadow there was long grass, and there were sheep, and amidst those sheep there was a young man, and his name was Paris. And as he stood there, in that meadow, suddenly there came walking out of the forest a young man with golden sandals, Hermes, the messenger of the gods. And behind him came three goddesses, Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. They all seemed blindingly bright. The air seemed to ripple before them as they walked. Paris turned away. He turned as though to run. He looked into the forest. The shadows there had never seemed so inviting. He longed to be a stone in that darkness, never to be seen, never to be found for as long as the world should last. But then Hermes spoke and said, "Young man, I bring a message to you from Father Zeus, the Lord of the lightning." And hearing these words, Paris froze. This was a messenger from Zeus, the king of the gods. He was a force of the universe. You did not cross or question his commands unless you wanted to end up dead, unless you wanted to risk being turned into a bull or a stick or a pile of ash. And perhaps that's the last moment Paris had as himself. Perhaps that's the last choice he was allowed to make. Perhaps everything after that moment was ordained, determined, and he was simply another drop of rain tumbling from a cloud down to earth, its end inevitable. But making this choice, Paris turned from the shadows of the forest. He turned and he faced them all. "We have a decision to make," said Hermes, "and we could use your help with it." And with that he handed Paris the golden apple. Paris looked down at the apple. He read the words written there, "For the most beautiful of them all." "We need someone to choose to whom this gift should be given," said Hermes, "and Zeus wishes you to be the one to decide." Paris looked at all three of the goddesses. They were each astonishingly beautiful. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, wearing a dress the colors of moon and cloud, gray-eyed Athena. And beside her, Hera, the queen of heaven, the wife of Zeus, wearing a dress of autumn-rich red colors. And beside her, Aphrodite, laughter-loving Aphrodite, not a child of Zeus, but a goddess born out of the sea at the beginning of time. How was he to choose? How was he to choose among them? He looked from one to the other, but always his eyes strayed back to Aphrodite. And then Athena said, "Aphrodite, you are wearing your belt of magical desire. You must remove that belt. It gives you an unfair advantage. For look how his eyes wander." Aphrodite scowled. "I will remove my belt. But what of your dress, Athena, that is the colors of the clouds and the moon? Everyone knows you are the finest weaver among all the gods. We must be judged on our own beauty and not that of our clothes." "Well then," said Hera, "we will remove our clothes." And with that she undid the sash of her dress and let it fall to the ground. And she stepped out of it and stood naked in the grass. And Aphrodite removed her belt of desire and let her dress fall to the ground as well, and Athena did the same, so that all three goddesses stood before Paris, naked, blindingly beautiful. And Paris found he could barely think. His heart was beating like a drum. He could hardly speak. And then Athena stepped forward, and she walked towards him, and she said, "Young man, consider my beauty well, but consider this also. If you choose me, I shall make you a wise and powerful man. Your wisdom shall be the envy of all on earth, and what's more, you shall never lose a battle. Think on this." And then Athena turned and walked back towards the others. And then Hera stepped forward, and she said, "Dear one, consider my beauty, yet consider this also. If you choose me, I shall make you the king of all the known world. Think of it, you, the powerful one, the king of all that there is on this earth." And then she turned and walked back to the others. Finally, Aphrodite came. With laughter in her eyes, she walked to Paris, and she said, "Dear one, Paris, look at me. Take in my beauty, yes, consider it well, but think on this as well. If you choose me, I shall give you the love of the most beautiful woman in all the world. A woman as beautiful as I am. Yes, she shall be yours. I do not offer you wisdom or power. What I offer you is love." And then, naked as she was, she leaned close to him, and she whispered in his ear, "Beautiful, wild love." And then, with a mischievous joy in her heart, she turned from Paris and walked back to the others. Paris struggled to take all of this in. He looked from one to the other. How was he to choose? The moment was a great gap filled with air. It was widening. He was falling down and down into it, never to be seen again, never to be found. And then he spoke and said, "I give this apple to Aphrodite." And he held it up, offering it to her. And as Aphrodite stepped towards him, Athena and Hera scowled and turned away. The air smoldered between them as they whispered amongst themselves. They picked up their clothes, they stepped up into the air and were gone. And Hermes departed as well. And then it was only Paris and Aphrodite there in the field. She reached out. She took hold of that golden apple. For a moment he felt the warmth of her fingertips on his own. And she said, "Paris, you have chosen well, for you have chosen love. Yes, I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Her name is Helen, Helen of Sparta." "Helen," said Paris, "of Sparta? But that is very far away. That's across the sea." "Yes," said Aphrodite, "but that is no problem. I shall see that the two of you are brought together. Paris, from this day forward, you need not fear the anger of men, the storms of the sea, or even death itself, for I shall protect you." But I'm just a boy from the forest, Paris said. How shall I meet such a woman as Helen of Sparta? Oh, do not worry, said Aphrodite. You are a boy of the forest, it is true, but that is not all you are. For you are in fact a prince of Troy. You are the son of King Priam himself. All you must do is go to Troy. There you will be recognized. Priam and Queen Hecuba will accept you, and all shall be well. And then, when you are comfortable in Troy, when the time feels right, simply say to your father that you wish to see the world, that you wish to take a trip to, well, Crete. Crete, said Paris. Yes, said Aphrodite. Tell him that. Tell him you wish to sail to Crete. Simply do that, and all shall be well, and Helen shall be yours. And laughing, Aphrodite turned from him, and then she stepped into that laughter and was gone. Paris looked around. The sun was high in the sky, Helios shining down. Around him were the sheep and the grasses and the trees. And the thought came to him that it was the wanderings of the sheep and their persistent hungers which had brought him on this day to this particular meadow. And at the end of that day, Paris walked with the sheep through the forest back to the hut where he lived with his father, Agilus. Now he called Agilus his father, but in fact they both knew that Agilus was simply his foster father, for who Paris's real parents were, he did not know. Agilus had simply found him nearly 18 years before, for one morning he'd been awoken by a cry, and he'd opened the door of his hut to find a small, very tiny baby lying there amid the leaves on the forest floor. He reached out, he bent down, he picked up that baby boy who was crying, and as he held the baby boy close to his chest, the boy stopped crying. And then Agilus felt something behind him. With his hunter's instincts, he knew he was being watched. And he turned, and there, amid the trees, he saw a great mother bear, shaggy and beautiful in her bulk. And she looked at him with her amber-colored eyes, and then she turned and went away into the forest. So Agilus had raised Paris in that forest, teaching him everything about the trees and the streams and the wind, teaching him how to shoot an arrow straight and true, and how to find his way through that forest, and how to read the stories written in the stars. So that evening, Paris and Agilus sat beside a crackling fire in their hut, and Paris told him all that had happened that day. And Agilus, who was a stocky man who always wore a green coat and had red hair, he listened quietly as Paris spoke. And then finally, Paris just asked him point blank, "Father, do you think I should go to Troy?" Agilus thought for a moment, and then he said, "My son, the gods send us strange gifts. Some of them are sweet, and some of them are sour and bring death. I say, listen to your heart. And if it feels right to you to go to Troy, then go. But do not be giddy, do not be careless. Remember all that you have learned here in the forest, and when the time feels right, come back to me." And then the two of them poured a little wine onto the floor as an offering to the deathless gods. And they drank some of that wine themselves, so that they too shared in that feast with the deathless ones. And then the two of them embraced by that crackling fire, and then they went off to sleep. But that night Paris found it hard to sleep. He kept tossing and turning, remembering all that had happened to him that day. And finally, when he did manage to sleep, he was suddenly woken up, but he heard no sound. The moon was shining in the window. His room was dark, but there was someone there, someone with him. "Hello," Paris said. "Hello, my love. Hello, Oenone." And she stepped into the moonlight, the river spirit Oenone, her long black hair going down to her waist. They'd fallen in love years before. He'd met her there beside the sparkling river, and they'd shared stories, she filled with stories of the long length of that river, and all she had learned while she flowed from the heights of that mountain, down past the great city of Troy, and out to the sea. And he told her stories of that forest, and his life with Agilus. And she loved the infinite smallness of his world, and he loved hearing from her of the great universe beyond. So she came to him that night as well, and stood in the moonlight. "Hello, my love," she said. And then she climbed into bed with him, and lay down beside him, and held him close. And she said, "Paris, what has happened to you today? I feel fear. Something has happened, I can feel it." And he told her about the visit of Hermes and the three goddesses to him in that mountain meadow. And as he spoke, Oenone saw many paths leading away from that moment, like paths into the forest. And some of them ended in fire and darkness, and others ended in light and happiness and laughter. And as he spoke, as she listened, these paths became the strings of a great harp, and she could hear the music coming from this harp, large and beautiful and swelling like the sea. For she had been taught the art of prophecy by the goddess Rhea, and by this art she could see far away into the darkness that was the past and the darkness that was the future. And when Paris had finished his story, she said, "Paris, do not go to Troy. If you do so, I see only trouble, I see only death. I fear for you, my love. I fear that you will never return, and your life will end in fire, will end in suffering." "Is it that simple?" said Paris. "You look into the future, and that is what you see?" "I see many futures for us both," said Oenone, "and these futures depend on what we do, how we think, how we act. They can be changed. But if you decide to go to Troy, what I see is death." "It did seem a bit like a trap," said Paris. "The way they looked at me. They all looked at me like a hawk looks at a mouse." And as he said these words, he thought to himself, "All of them except Aphrodite, who seemed delighted to see me." "Yes," said Oenone, "it may very well be a trap. Why did they need you? What did they want? What are they seeking? And now you have a friend among the gods, but also two enemies. Paris, stay here. Stay here in the forest. Stay here with me." "That sounds lovely," said Paris. And he took her in his arms, and the two of them shared once again the delights of love in that small hut, as the moonlight shone in through the window and fell in patterns on the floor. But later that night, Paris had a dream. And in this dream, he was standing in a beautiful garden beneath a pear tree. And this pear tree was in blossom, and the white blossoms were falling down softly, gently around him, carried there by the warm wind. And in the morning, Oenone awoke to find Paris gone. And on the floor, which had been covered with moonlight, the sun was shining. And so, weeping, she slipped away from that hut, went to the river, dove into that river, and vanished. And Agilus had gotten up early before the birds, and gone out hunting in the forest. He'd gone hunting on this day, not with a bow or arrows, not with a spear, but only with his hearing and with his sight, and with his instincts, the 13 senses that those of us who live far from the wild forget we have. And on that morning, in this way, he caught many animals, but killed none. And then, later that morning, he returned to that hut in the forest. But as he walked back, he saw before the door of his hut something sparkling in the grass. And he walked over to it and picked it up, and he saw that it was a silver rattle crafted for a child. And as he stood there in front of his hut, holding that silver rattle, he suddenly felt something behind him. And he turned, and he looked, and there, between the trees, he saw the great mother bear. And she looked at him, as she had so many years before, with her amber-colored eyes, She looked at him for a long time, and there was much speaking in the silence that they shared. And then she turned and quietly went off into the forest. Agilus watched her go, and then he sat down on a stump by his front door, there in the sunlight, and he looked at this rattle, and he saw that it had names printed on it. He read them. There was the name Hector. There was Deiphobus and Cassandra, and he realized that these were the names of all of the children of Priam and Hecuba, the king and queen of Troy. He read down the list of beautiful names, and he knew them all. For he did go to Troy now and again, sometimes because the Sibyl of Troy requested that he bring something from the deep forest, perhaps a special plant or a stone or a leaf from a magical tree. Or sometimes King Priam would request a special animal for the feasting hall, perhaps a white deer or a goat with blue spots between his horns. And Agilus would find this animal and bring it to the city of Troy. And there in the throne room or in the feasting hall, he'd seen all of the royal family, and he knew them by name. But there, on this little silver rattle, was one last name that he'd never seen before, and the name was Alexander. He looked at that name for a long time, and then he just sat there on that stump in the forest, thinking. What would you choose? Given that choice, put in that situation, what would you choose? What have you chosen? Look around at your life. Which of those powers have you decided to be loyal to? To wisdom? To power in the world? To strength? To love? Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for attending to it. This part of the story is called The Judgment of Paris. What a wild scene, huh? What does it all mean? It's called The Judgment of Paris, but it's as if he's in charge and he gets to choose, but he gets very little choice. Isn't it that way? Isn't it that way? He's picked by the gods. They've chosen him. Zeus has chosen him, and he's stuck with it. And the moment that calls out to me from this story, the moment my heart goes to, is the moment when Paris turns away from the three goddesses and from Hermes and panics and is about to run in terror before them. It's a remarkable moment. And then he turns and he accepts his fate and he turns. He turned and he faced them all. It's a beautiful, brave moment. Just wonderful. And these three goddesses are showing up. They're beautiful. There's Hermes. He's, Mr. Young Man, golden sandal. But his first instinct is to run. That's instructive to me. Where did I find that? Well, I didn't think that up. I found it on here's the footnote. I found it in a book by Jane Harrison, the amazing explorer of ritual and sacrifice and religion in ancient Greece. And she's got a couple books, and in one of them, she mentions this scene, talks about it. And she references a vase, and there's an image of the vase from ancient Greece. And there it is, and there's the three goddesses, and there's Paris turning from them, like wants to get out of there. You can tell from the image on the vase. He's about to run and just take off. But Hermes stops him. Hermes holds him by the arm and is like, wait a minute, Buster. Wait a minute. You can't go anywhere. You can't go anywhere. He's stuck. So, I mean, in our lives now, in my life now, life of receipts, smartphones, cars and roads, the arrival of the divine would seem to be what is a miraculous thing. The arrival of some power beyond us, some magical, superhuman, divine power. I like to think that I would welcome that if that happened. If I was going down the street, if I was caught in some meadow, in some corner of this world, and the gods or the goddesses chose to visit me. But in fact, Paris's first reaction is to run. So it's instructive to me because it reminds us of the power that these beings have. They are terrible. They inspire terror. They are destructive. Mortals tangle with the gods, and often it ends badly. They end up dead or changed into something, or desperately unhappy, or undertaking horrible labors that they have to do. So that's a reminder to me of the world this story comes from. And it reminds me, it teaches me not to take this too lightly, not to just think of the divine as something cuddly and beautiful. And in this story, certainly at this part, it does come dressed in beauty. And it can seem almost like some weird male fantasy, right? These three goddesses show up. He's got to pick one of them. They take off their clothes. I mean, honestly, I was really on the fence about keeping that in there. It depends on, that's an idea. That's from Ovid, Ovid. I live in Ithaca, New York, upstate New York. And there's a town near here named Ovid. Ovid, and it's named after the poet whose name is Ovid. So I have a horrible time keeping the two apart, but poetry makes you go, so I think, well, Ovid. So, all right, correction, Ovid. So Ovid, the Roman poet, wrote about this scene, and he added the detail of them removing their clothes. And so, yeah, like I say, I was on the fence. I was like, do we need that? I don't know. Is it kind of puerile? Is it a little too teenage boyish? But it's also sort of funny. And so, well, I kept it in. So, yeah, so we get this scene, which is sort of like some kind of male fantasy. Goddesses coming at you. All right, great. But in fact, his reaction is terror. And as it happens, that's a good reaction. That is not just a natural instinct for him, this character, but it's a good reaction because he is trapped and because this does not end well for him. No. What choice is he really given? The real choice before him is to choose how Troy will be destroyed. That's the decision he has. He chooses love as his sort of what he wants, but that means that Athena and Hera will now raise Troy to the ground using their powers of as queen of heaven, wife of Zeus for Hera, and as wisdom and strategy, Athena. You don't want them as your enemies, man. But there's no real choice, because if he'd chosen one of them, if he'd chosen Athena, for example, then power in the form of Hera and love in the form of Aphrodite would have conspired to destroy that city as well. And as you know, as I know, as we know perhaps from looking at the headlines, looking at the world, power and love can do a lot to bring things down, to destroy them. So there's no way out for him. There's no escape. He's been chosen, and Troy is going to be destroyed, and that's all there is to it. So the choice he gets is really the manner of the destruction of Troy, the way it's going to be done. How would you like it done, basically, the gods say. But he will get pleasure. I mean, we don't want to knock that. He does choose love. And that would seem to be the wisest choice. What do we want in life? Do you want power? Do you want cleverness? Do you want strategy? All of the wisdom of the strategy? Or do you want love? What makes you happy? That's the question he is asked, perhaps. What makes you happiest? And so he chooses. And we should not overlook the detail that Aphrodite is intimately connected to war and to death. She is married to Hephaestus, the lame blacksmith god of up there on Olympus, but she has a thing for Ares, the god of war. And in fact, they get together all the time, and on one occasion are caught by Hephaestus, and all the gods see this. So I ask you to sit with that. I ask you to reflect upon that. Love and beauty has a thing, loves war, and war loves beauty and love. On one level, I think of public school growing up. I think of the cheerleaders and the jocks, right? The cheerleaders, so young women with beauty as a big goal for them, and the jocks with strength and power as a goal for them. Well, let's just say strength. And so the two of them, well, hang out. That's one way to look at it. Well, that's one aspect of it. That's one expression of this pattern in the world. Another pattern, another way this pattern is expressed is the beauty of war and destruction. We watch war movies. How many of us have not seen a movie in which things blow up, in which things are destroyed? And I am not a vet. Let me just say that right here. I have no experience of war, but you talk to vets, you hear from them, and what they've been through is, well, it's things I can't imagine, but it's intense, and it's also something they sort of long for, it seems. Who am I to speak for them? I'm not trying to speak for them, but just from, well, reading about it and talking to some of them, those moments of trauma and destruction also showed them, it revealed to them a level of life which was a revelation they were glad for. That is at least my experience of it from talking to people, hearing things in books and things like that. And in my own life, like I've said, I'm not a vet, no experience of war, zero, thankfully. But I was a ranger in Yosemite, and there was a summer with this gigantic forest fire, and things were kind of urgent, and we, in the end, had to evacuate. So I bring that up because for me, that was an experience which was kind of horrible and beautiful at the same time. To see that fire, to wake up and to climb up on a ridge, hike up on a ridge with my infant daughter, toddler, I guess. No, infant. She was like 2 years old, maybe. I had her on a little baby carrier on my chest, and I'd hike up this wonderful ridge with lots of tumble-down boulders and sugar pine trees. And there was a clearing up there, and I'd look, and I'd see this immense mushroom cloud every day. Because the fire was so big, it was taking that form of a mushroom cloud, generating its own weather, so we were told. This was the Rim Fire back in 2015 maybe. So I remember that experience, and it was like, wow, scary. We got to get out of here. But it was simultaneously beautiful. And so it's like, and that's an experience beyond our usual categories, right? Beauty and death and destruction all come together. And we weren't in super serious danger. We had a car, it's nothing. I'm not saying it's anything like war for sure. But just that sense of like immense destruction, which was also beautiful, reminds me, it comes back to me now, thinking of the connection between beauty and war, beauty and death. And so when Paris chooses Aphrodite, perhaps he doesn't know that he's getting a bargain. He's getting a deal because he's getting another god as well, which is the god of war, because they are intimately connected. Maybe that's the subtext. That's the hidden part of this story, hidden to him. Oh, man. Well, yeah, those are some thoughts about that. And don't let them fill your head. If you've got your own thoughts, I would welcome those. And as I've often said on this podcast, this showbiz extravaganza, this parade of images, this Poetry International Cosmopolis, I say, shut me up, turn me off, shut me down, and let your own thoughts come to you, your own feelings. Where in this story do you go? Where do you want to be? What haunts you about this story or not? And I also added the little bits about Aglis and Oenone, the nymph, the river spirit. Could we skip all this? Well, we kind of could. Yeah, sure. I mean, Paris makes a choice. Boom, let's get on with it. He goes to Troy. That's the next episode, which is coming at you, believe me. But I don't know. I felt like he needed the whole story. I felt like I wanted to dwell a little bit in this whole story. Who is Paris anyway? He's a guy protected by the feminine, it seems. The mountain, Mount Ida, is sacred to the Great Mother among the Hittite peoples of Asia Minor at this time. And so he's put there to die, ostensibly, but really he's put there to let the goddess decide. That's how I see it. I think that's probably how it is. If they'd really wanted to kill him, they could have they could have done that in a lot of ways. But Hecuba surrenders him to the mountain, as if to say, here, you decide. And I think of Taliesin thrown on the waves, for example, in the Welsh story. Just saying. I think of the sea, also a mothering image, right? So Paris is cared for by the mountain. He's also cared for by a mother bear. And then these three goddesses show up. So he is surrounded by the feminine powers of the world, divine mostly. And he's a pretty boy. He's got these nice clothes, I have to say. Just mentioning, in all the images of him from the ancient world, he's always got, the most amazing clothes on. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that as part of the story as well. And I say ancient world, and that feels kind of wrong. I mean, sure, ancient world, but this is this world. Paris is here. He's around. I've had him as a roommate, actually. In fact, Agilus is a guy. He's real. He may be you. He may be me. He may be the father you never knew. These goddesses, they are a real thing. And love and war, well, look around. See what you see. Do they have a thing, a little affair, or not? These stories speak to us and they've lasted so long because they are maps which remain true for the world around us. They give us images. They give us a vocabulary with which to look at our own lives and the world around us. And they help us to see deeper into things. And that is a blessing, and that is a great help to us as we go through this life. And so I would say also, just notice how fate and choice come into this story. The storyteller behind this story, the ancient mysterious one who is eternal, who is telling us this story, who might be the earth herself. That being is ruminating on fate and choice. Do we have a choice or not? In the modern world, we like to think we do. We can choose everything. Choose what we wear, choose where we go, choose how we die even, choose when we die. That's our illusion, that's our goal, that's what we aspire to. We walk around believing that, I think, most of us. But this story tells us we don't have that much choice. This story tells us that certain things are laid down for us, are fated, are chosen by others. And even the gods are subject to this. Even Zeus is subject to fate. That's what the dragon priestess at Delphi has said. So, yeah, the gods are subject to fate as well. Who's in charge? Who decides that the Trojan War is going to happen? Is it Prometheus? Is it Zeus? Is it Paris? Is it Gaia herself? Maybe Gaia's in charge. Would that feel nice? Maybe she is in charge. But maybe no one is in charge. Maybe it is not a hierarchy in that way. Maybe it's more a circle and a dance. And the cloud in the sky, and the worm in the ground, and the car on the road, and the carrot in your fridge, they are all part of one thing that we cannot conceive of, cannot hold in our imaginations or our hearts. And it has no leader, no one in control, no one running the show. But each one has a choice to make, a small choice, which affects everything else. And it's all a dance, and we are in that dance. So those are some ravings and ramblings from me. Don't let them impinge upon your own ravings and ramblings. I hope my thoughts inspire you to find your own thoughts about this story, and to hold this story in your hearts, and to keep it, and to remember it, and to perhaps tell it to someone else. Yeah, tell it to someone else. It's out there in the world. Those folks in school, if you are a person in school, the ones choosing their majors, what are you going to major in? Athena, Hera, Aphrodite, Ares? What are you going to choose? We think we have choice. This story is out there in the world. May we find it there at the same time that it lives within us. May our attention to it make this story fat and make it thrive, so that it lives and goes on to nourish and teach others in a time soon to come, a time beyond our own. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are more stories on my website, jayleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com, and you can support this podcast at patreon.com/storyjl. And that is of immense help to me. It keeps this situation free. Over 120 episodes, free to the world. All right. Yeah, so that helps make that possible. And thank you to all those who have already supported this podcast in that way. And while you're at it, give a gift to the story. Give a gift to this story. Give it some wine, some honey. Give it something you make with your own hands. A poem, something you've woven, something you've carved. Give it a gift, something delicious to feed the deliciousness you have received. Give it a gift in that way so that we are in relationship with it. And it's not just a thing ripped out of a book that we can exploit, we can mine, like we mine the coal in the ground. Give it a gift so that we may live in relationship with it. Those are thoughts I've heard from others, from in particular a fellow named Martin Prechtel, who's taught me a lot about story. Thank you for listening to this, and all blessings to you, and take care.